Hey everybody, Amy here with part 2 of my series on the English Civil War, or the Civil War. And basically the question we're trying to answer here is, why is it that England's attempt to run their country without a king failed, and then a little while later America's attempt to run a country without a king succeeded, so far. And so here in part 2 we're just talking about the run-up to the Civil War, the starting line, the preconditions, basically saying, why did it happen? Why did England try running their country without a king at all? Which essentially amounts to asking, how did Charles I screw this up so badly? Because Charles I was raised for one job, to be King of England, Scotland, and Ireland, and when he was crowned in 1625, England had been a monarchy for like almost 600 years. And by the end of his reign, not only were people so mad at him that they didn't want him to be king anymore, that they cut his head off, but they're like, you were so bad at being a king that we've just lost faith in the whole system. We don't even want a king at all anymore. Nobody should be king. How did that happen? Because the answer isn't as simple as he was just the worst British king. Like, was he a good king? No. I think if your people cut your head off, you're kind of disqualified from the good king sweepstakes, right? But was he the worst king that England had had to that point? I don't think so. He wasn't great. He wasn't a deep thinker, certainly. But he was pretty mid, really. So why did it go so wrong for him? And the reason is that he was trying to uphold a system that had already collapsed, but nobody really realized it yet. So that's really a lot of what we're talking about today, is the collapse of the medieval system. What was the medieval system? I think my analogy for it is going to be, the medieval system saw the whole world as being built out of two pyramids. One was the spiritual pyramid, that started with you going to church, and then your priest has a bishop, an archbishop, cardinal, pope, god. Boom. That's the spiritual pyramid. Over here is the political or temporal pyramid. That's you going to work in your fields. You've got the lord of the manor nearby. He reports to a baron, who reports to a duke, who reports to a king, who reports to the Holy Roman Emperor, perhaps. And that's the political pyramid. And that worked well in medieval times. People were happy with it because, everybody, you knew your place in it. You know how to deal with the people who are on the same level of the pyramid, or one up or one down. And if you were on the level of the pyramid, you understood that, while yes, you were on a lower level, you were holding the pyramid up. Like, the people above couldn't do without you holding you up. And so everybody felt like they were part of a whole system, and that they were contributing to society. Now, we can look back at this with our modern hindsight, and it seems kind of silly to us, because we can see that those pyramids were never as neat as medieval people imagined them to be. There were popes and anti-popes and schisms, all sorts of political disputes happening all the time. The Holy Roman Emperor thing never really did work out. But it worked in medieval times because really all that mattered then was what was local, like what was going on in your little brick of the pyramid and the bricks immediately around it. Because remember, at this point, the most advanced transportation technology is guy riding on a horse. And the most advanced communication technology is yelling, right? Or sure, yes, you could write a message and give it to a guy who would ride on a horse with it. That sounds trivial to us now, but go out into the woods right now, and using just what you can find in nature, figure out how to write down a legible message that is portable that you could hand to a guy on a horse. It's a lot of work. People did it all the time, but it was effort. You didn't generally bother unless there was a good reason. And so everybody assumed that, whatever little disputes were going on in their little section of the pyramid, they could kind of just sort of assume that everything else was working as it was supposed to, and everything was good. Then some wise guy comes along and invents the printing press, and that's when the pyramids start to collapse. Because all of a sudden, people all throughout the pyramid, maybe not the very lowest levels, but all throughout the pyramid, can start to see what's going on at all the other levels, all throughout Europe, and they realize that it is not the neat, orderly thing that they had been led to believe. This is the collapse of the medieval system, and this is the Protestant Reformation. Because it's the spiritual pyramid that collapses first. Because, the political pyramid, while it was even messier, did still have the fundamental mortar of it going on, in my metaphor, of, I will send people with swords to murder you, to sort of keep everybody in line. The spiritual side didn't have that so much, although they tried. Uh, and so, yeah, so the spiritual pyramid had started collapsing well before Charles I comes onto the scene in the course of the Protestant Reformation. That brings us to Henry VIII, very famous British king, probably most famous for murdering his wives, although, to be fair, he had 6 wives, only murdered 2 of them, so, you know, on average, right? But I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely an example of, in terms of just being a personal monster, I would rank Henry VIII well ahead of Charles I. But in any case, what happened was, this spiritual pyramid was collapsing. There were a lot of people in England who agreed with that and wanted to help it along because they had, you know, wanted to no longer have this hierarchical authority in their relationship with God. They wanted to form their own relationship with God through reading the Bible, and they didn't want to take the word of some guy in Italy that they'd never met. So when Henry VIII got into an argument over the Pope about a divorce, which kings all over Europe had been getting arguments with the Pope all throughout the medieval system, but nobody else had really known about it. This time, there were a bunch of people hanging around ready to latch onto it to advance their cause of dismantling that spiritual pyramid. And like, you know, the question of why did Henry VIII do what he did was a very hotly debated question in his lifetime while he was doing it, and has been hotly debated ever since. So, you know, there's a lot of views out there. My sort of feeling is, like, I don't think he was ever a particularly deep religious thinker. He just wanted what he wanted and was kind of, to some extent, easily exploited by the people around him, is sort of how I look at it. But basically, yeah, at some point, he got into an argument with the Pope, and a bunch of people were there to say, hey, let's take this opportunity to tell the Pope to, you know, go to hell. We're just going to run things in England here, get rid of this whole spiritual pyramid, let's center everything in England. You're in charge, Henry. And he was like, so you mean I get to have sex with Anne Boleyn? And they were like, yes. And he was like, cool. And it seems that, like, most people in England were on board with this, wanting to get out of that spiritual pyramid, but many people weren't. And so it was, you know, messy. And then every time one of Henry VIII's wives, whenever that position became vacant for whatever reason, all of us was a chance for people on both sides to try and swing things either way. And that mess kind of continued throughout the reigns of, especially his first few children, you know, well, I mean, there was Lady Jane Grey, and Edward IV, I think, was his child. Whichever Edward was Henry VIII's son, and Queen Mary, Bloody Mary. And then finally Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, another famous British monarch, his daughter. And when she came along, she was basically like, hey, we all kind of want to just chill out about this for a while, right? And everybody was like, yeah, we kind of just want to chill out about it for a while, for the most part. And, you know, one of the ways that she managed this chill period that we call the Elizabethan Age was thinking, you know, my dad, every time he got married or thought about it or thought about getting divorced, it caused a huge, you know, mess. I'm just gonna not get married at all. And it succeeded, you know, in her lifetime. Like, that was probably the right thing to do. But then, you know, of course, when she died, there was no heir immediately obvious. It turned out to work all right. Everybody pretty quickly came together on James the First and Seventh, I think. He had been King of Scotland already. But then when Queen Elizabeth died, it was decided that he should be King of England too. So he comes down, and England also claimed Ireland this time, those filthy bastards. And he becomes James the First of England and Ireland, and James the Sixth, I think, of Scotland. And this is Charles I's father. So he's come along, and now this spiritual pyramid has been collapsing all over Europe, and there is a whole awful mess going on called the 30 Years' War, which, again, could be its own even longer video series, and maybe will be at some point. And James looked at all this and was like, let's not get involved in that. Which is people were mostly on board with, although those who did want him to get involved really felt like they should have gotten involved on the Protestant side, especially because one of the main characters in the 30 Years' War on the Protestant side was James's daughter. But he was like, no, you all fight amongst yourselves in Europe. I have had enough fighting already in my life, because remember, he came up through Scottish politics, and Scottish politics was not for the weak of heart. Um, you go look at Mary Queen of Scots and all that sort of thing. Like, if he had survived in Scottish politics, he knew that he didn't want no trouble. And so he just wanted everything to be just, calm and orderly, and that was his deal. Now, the thing about it was, there was this tension building because nobody had yet realized, and actually, like, James I kind of did realize that the political pyramid had always kind of depended on the spiritual one, because having to do whatever the people above you said, kind of sucked. People don't like it. People want to have their own free will. But one of the things that made people go along with it was the understanding was that there was this other pyramid over there that kind of acted as a check on that. And if that was not going to be there, then, that was what gave the rulers on the political pyramid legitimacy and made people agree to that. James I recognized this. One of his famous quotes was, "No bishop, no king." When people wanted to flatten out the remaining little mini English spiritual pyramid that had been created by Henry VIII, he was very much against that. He was like, no, we have to keep this hierarchical structure with me at the top. And, it wasn't popular, but he was a canny dude. He made things work. He got it done through his life, because he knew that it was a whole mess, and, he needed to do the work to keep everybody content. Then he dies, and his son Charles becomes king, and Charles, not canny. He does not understand that this is a whole mess. He thinks everything is still in a neat pyramid just like it has always been, and is blindly unaware of all the crumbling and shattering that is going on around him, and ends up doing his part to make that crumbling and shattering worse. That crumbling and shattering is what we'll be talking about in Part 3, which we will talk about the actual English Civil War. This part was a little bit more philosophical, but Part 3 is really, very much about the, details, the, people, the characters, the cut and thrust of politics, the exciting adventures, the fighting and the shooting and whatnot. So I hope you join me for that. And yeah, the English Civil War. On we go.